Hi, everyone. Is there feedback or is that just me? Okay. I understand that things have been running a little early today, and so they've asked me to get started. So I know it's a few minutes ahead of schedule, but I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy to jump in. So my name is DeeDee Lavinder, and I currently work as an engineering manager at Zip. I've worked in technology for the past 7 or so years, and most of that time was spent as a back-end engineer. My background before tech is pretty eclectic. I've worked in several other industries, including construction and trucking. But my most recent professional endeavor before coding was opening and then operating a brick and mortar retail store for children and their families. Imagine my transition from toys and cute little baby clothes to Jira and intense discussions about code editors. There were more than a few things that were tough in that transition. Some were expected. I knew about the lack of overall diversity in tech related to skin color, gender, age, parental status, etc. Some things were unexpectedly hard. Pizza was incredibly hard to avoid. Remember pre-pandemic days? It was at every tech meetup, lunch and learn, you name it. Another unexpectedly not fun thing was meetings. Compared to my previous jobs, there are a lot of meetings in tech. On the one hand, that isn't a bad thing. We need to build shared understanding. We need to plan and prepare. We want to be informed and connected. On the other hand, how many meetings actually accomplish those goals effectively? I've been to so many awful meetings in tech. I'm curious, and you don't need to raise your hands, just silently reflect. In the last 2 weeks, how many of you have been to a meeting with no agenda? How about a meeting during which you did not speak or otherwise contribute? How about a meeting you probably could have skipped or didn't even really need to attend? I wish I could have all those many hours back when I sat in an hour-long meeting with a group of engineers and only 3 or 4 people spoke the entire time, and the meeting ended without a single action item or clear decision. At first, I thought, I'm new to the industry. When I know more, I'll contribute. Then I realized there were several people in those meetings who knew way more than I did and were also not contributing. So I started trying to really understand what was going on. Because here's the thing, in my life before and outside of technology, I regularly facilitate amazing group discussions all the time. They're interesting, even fun, consistently have a 100% participation rate, and are extremely productive. I know it sounds incredible, but it's true. I volunteer as a sexuality educator for children, mostly 5th graders and their families, and use a curriculum called OWL, which stands for Our Whole Lives. Now, the work I do as a sexuality educator covers lots of topics, many of which can be awkward or even difficult. Families each come with their own unique mix of values, characteristics, communication styles, and even concerns. Now layer that with the individual personalities and experiences of the children and their parents or caregivers. Some are shy, some are nervous, some are extremely opinionated, some are talkers, some are not happy. Actually, this is sounding a little bit like some of the engineering teams I've been on, which leads us back to meetings in tech. Through the years, despite all the awful meetings, there were a handful of good and even great meetings. And guess what made the difference? The moderator, every single time. So while my experience as a moderator and facilitator was growing, my experience as a participant was as well. And I started to really analyze what worked and what didn't. One thing that stood out to me was the huge difference in the level of engagement and sense of belonging I noticed between the OWL participants and the engineers. In OWL sessions, the moderator works hard to be sure that the participants know from the beginning that their opinion matters and that the group will benefit from each individual's contribution. Building trust is a key objective from the very first meeting. Back in tech meetings, this was hardly happening, if at all. And I thought about who wasn't contributing. The person that gave the most thoughtful PR reviews, the one everyone wanted to discuss their work with, the engineer that wrote such amazing code you were inspired to study it, the person on the team with a really unique perspective. The cost of not hearing the possible contributions from everyone in a meeting is something to consider deeply. The cost of making anyone feel excluded or like they don't belong is too high to ignore. I'm convinced that poorly run meetings reduce your team's overall productivity and damage folks' sense of belonging. So today we're going to dive into the role of the moderator, the meeting leader, the facilitator. This role is critical and I believe carries the responsibility for the outcome of the meeting. In the same way that we expect teachers to utilize a variety of tools and techniques for teaching, we don't ask children to adjust their learning style. Putting the burden of the meeting outcome on participants is a recipe for failure. The moderator bears the burden of creating an atmosphere where each person feels their contributions matter and they're comfortable participating. It all starts way before the actual meeting. And I would say it starts even before planning the meeting. To craft an inclusive meeting, an effective moderator needs a wide range of tools and techniques to creatively engage everyone participating. So let's start with what I like to call the moderator's toolbox. Your goal as a moderator is to remove any and all barriers to participation. To do this, you need to consider psychological barriers. There may also be physical or logistic barriers, and we're going to discuss that as well. But for now, I want you to consider that you may not know or be able to know all the factors that are possibly holding someone back from contributing. It could be that they're shy, or suffering from imposter syndrome, or feeling insecure about their level of experience or knowledge. You want to level the playing field as much as you can. I challenge you to use anonymity whenever possible. This will go further than you think. When you're in person, make sure all your sticky notes and pens are the same color. When you're in a virtual meeting, use products that support anonymity like Jamboard, and there are others. Also, remember how only a few people talked during those awful hour-long meetings I mentioned? If your group is larger than 5 or 6 people, break out into smaller groups for any discussion. The ideal size for a small group discussion is between 3 and 5 people. The larger the group, the longer amount of time they need for everyone to be comfortable contributing. So small group discussions actually fit into the next item as well, and that is to develop a wide range of techniques for encouraging participation. Maybe you put folks in pairs and have them record each other's thoughts. Maybe you ask each small group to address a different topic and then bring those discussion points back to the larger group. Or maybe you ask each group to decide on what's important to them, and now you have a collection of important feelings from everyone. Sometimes small groups are not the answer. Perhaps you give the whole group 5 minutes of silence so that each person can reflect and record their own thoughts or opinions. Perhaps you have the whole group working collectively on the same digital document. It doesn't all need to be verbal or vocal. If you're in person, you can actually encourage some movement. Have folks move to a different location in the room based on their choice or opinion. If you agree, move to the right. If you don't, move to the left. You can do similar things online with built-in tools that are in the video conferencing applications. On Google Meet, maybe you ask a series of yes or no questions and ask folks to raise a hand. On Zoom, maybe you ask yes or no questions and ask folks to shut off their video. If you want everyone to answer a question or share an idea, try asking them to answer in the round. This ensures everyone speaks and helps those who need time to prepare to know where they are in line. Always be explicit that passing is allowed. We don't want to force anyone to participate if they don't have anything to share. But you can also use the tennis ball method. So in an online meeting, this is obviously an abstract idea, but whoever is speaking tosses the ball to or chooses the next person to speak. Now, this is only really suitable for groups of less than 8 to 10 people. Otherwise, it becomes hard to keep track of who has yet to be called on. If you're okay with only a few contributions, you can suggest popcorn style. This is when folks speak as they're moved, but only speak once. There are so many options here. You can use polls or surveys or Google Forms right inside your meeting. Have it set up ahead of time and then give folks the time they need to fill it out during the meeting. This is a way to ensure 100% participation. So this sort of leads to the next idea, which is to elevate the written components of your meeting time. The things I just mentioned, polls, surveys, Google Forms, they all help with this. The idea is that you're trying to capture the thoughts and opinions of your participants. This is critical data that you want to capture and record. If you're in person, this means that you scribe or record all contributions. So if you're thinking ahead, you could ask someone to help you with this or ask someone to volunteer to do it. But this means that you're writing things down as people say it on a whiteboard or a flip chart. If you're online, you can use digital artifacts for collaboration with this, and that helps with this. Google Docs or Sheets, something where everyone can be contributing at the same time. When you put folks in small groups, ask for a note taker or volunteer in each group, or assign one, like right when you break out, not as an afterthought. Adding importance to these written components in your meeting serves multiple purposes. It helps capture those fresh ideas and thoughts. It helps those who are more visually inclined, and it acts as a record of what was discussed or accomplished. Now, there are times that things will not go as you'd hoped. One of your best and most important skills as a moderator is to be flexible and willing to pivot. If something isn't working, scrap it. Try something else. When you have a wide range of methods for encouraging participation, you can easily pivot to another technique. Turn your creative juices on, be agile, and remember, you are responsible for the outcome of the meeting. Okay, now that you're feeling well equipped, lots of techniques to choose from, it's time to start planning the meeting. Now, I cannot overstate the importance of establishing a really clear objective for your meeting. Without this, everything else becomes much more difficult. A clear objective with a solid idea of your expected outcomes is paramount. What do you want to convey? What do you want the participants to share or to come away with? What do you hope to learn from the participants? This is all thought work that you've done ahead of the meeting time. If you're working with a group of people and it isn't clear what the objective of the meeting should be, I'm sorry if you're in that position, but you can crowdsource this. You can run a brainstorming session about what topics folks would like to discuss, have everyone vote, and now you have a list of topics to work from. Is your list getting low? Repeat the exercise. People actually want to talk about things. The next thing is crafting the schedule or the structure of the meeting. And there are several considerations you'll need to take into account beforehand. How much time is needed? How many participants will be there? A critical aspect to planning your meeting is budgeting your time wisely. And this is directly related to the number of people in the meeting. Do you know how long it takes for 20 people to introduce themselves? Well, it depends on what structure you've put in place. Without any structure, it could easily take more than an hour, and that would only be 3 minutes per person on average. By creating a structured prompt, name, title, favorite vegetable, you might get it down to 15 or 20 minutes. By providing a structured order, like going around the circle or posting a list of names in the video chat, you might get it down to 10 minutes. This is an example, a small one, to show you the power of creating structure, considering your participants and allotted time, all in service of your objectives. Now, there are many ways to creatively design the strategies you'll use to generate your desired outcomes. If your objective is simply to disseminate information, the structure of your meeting will be fairly straightforward. If you want to gather feedback, gauge interest, or make sure participants have an increased understanding of a concept or a topic, then you need to design a meeting that can capture all of those inputs. So let's say you have a clear objective, you've planned the structure of the meeting. This is translated to your agenda, which you should publish as early as possible. I have a whole separate talk about introverts and extroverts, but I'll say this. Your introverts need time outside of the meeting to think deeply about the topics before they'll be prepared to contribute to the discussion. When introverts are listening, they are listening deeply. They are not preparing their response. Ever wonder why some people sort of pause before responding? I promise you, you want to know what the introverts on your team are thinking. And every team has at least 30 to 50%, is comprised of 30 to 50% introverts. Okay. The other thing you want to consider before the meeting are logistics. These are those sort of physical things I was mentioning before. Is your meeting in person? How much space do you need? Please don't invite 12 people to a meeting room with a table that seats 6. This does not make everyone feel like they are on equal footing, with some at the table and some squeezed into the corners of the room. Are you going to ask folks to break into smaller groups? If so, do you have enough space for folks to move chairs around? What about supplies? Sticky notes, poster paper, whiteboard, pens. This all depends on the meeting structure that you've planned. Will you have some folks participating remotely? Then everyone should act like they're remote. A hybrid meeting with some remote and some in-person is a place where inclusion can really take a hit. Just plan to level the playing field and have everyone use their laptop. If anyone is remote, act like everyone is remote. You want each person to be able to see and hear each participant. Otherwise, you're asking for disengagement. We're just humans, after all. Which leads to the next important step for a moderator, and that is setting the tone. You've planned it all out, and now the meeting is here, and you, the moderator, are responsible for setting the tone. Don't neglect this aspect. Being clear with yourself about your own intentions ahead of time is really critical. A moderator is not there to get their point across. If that's your intention, send an email. Your intention to stay committed to the desired outcome of the meeting is crucial. And your intentions impact the tone of the meeting from the very beginning. So start the meeting by stating the purpose of the meeting and reiterating the objectives, the hoped for outcomes, and the planned agenda. In some cases, it can be helpful to set ground rules or develop group agreements. Once established, these can be periodically reviewed and should be consistently enforced by the moderator. Things like not interrupting or not speaking twice before everyone else has had the chance to speak once are sometimes important to call out. Another important element to setting an inclusive tone is to include introductions and/or icebreakers. Learning folks' names, how to correctly pronounce them, is key to building an inclusive environment. And trust is built as we get to know each other. Icebreakers might seem cheesy. Okay, they definitely are cheesy. But they're also effective in lightening the mood and getting each person to contribute something small early on in the meeting. Okay, so the tone of the meeting is in a good place, and now we're going to make the magic of the meeting happen. As you live into your intention to be an effective moderator during the meeting, be aware and observant and watch for patterns. Women and non-binary folks speak less and are interrupted more. Introverts do not interrupt, and those who are newer to the company or who have fewer years of experience may need special encouragement. When meetings exclude some voices, the benefit of a diverse team is squandered. Your job as the moderator is to steer the discussion. You've done all this work to plan the meeting and set the tone. So now it is your responsibility to keep the conversation on track. This also includes minding the time. Timing is very tricky. This comes with experience, and you're not going to always get it right. While you want to stick to your schedule and your agenda, you also want to balance that with the spirit of the moment. So this is one of the really tricky things about being a good moderator, is minding the time. Do you skip something on the agenda because what you're doing is so important? That's a call you have to make in the moment. And the last thing is to be courageous. This means a lot of different things. It means you interrupt those interrupters. Oh, hey, hang on for a second. I wasn't sure that we let so-and-so finish. I'm really curious where they were going with that, right? Sometimes it means calling on someone who hasn't had an opportunity to contribute and asking if they agree with what's been said. That's a yes or no question. It's a very easy way to invite someone to share more broadly. If someone is rude or inappropriate, it is your job to call them out and correct that right then and there. It doesn't need to be in a shaming way. It needs to be in a very direct and calm way to say, that's inappropriate, we don't do that here, and then move on. Courage is needed for all of these things. Sticking to the schedule, steering the discussion, making split-second decisions about when to move on and when to make space. You also have to have the courage to acknowledge your mistakes as a moderator and retrace your steps if necessary. You might have to move backwards to correct something. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about some tips and tricks for moderators. This is a big, important job. You have to remain neutral. If this is a conversation where you feel like you have to contribute or you have to take a side, ask someone else to moderate. As a moderator, you are facilitating. Your participation will distract you from your job. The next thing is that you have to listen and listen well. And this is a skill that takes practice. You also may need to clarify, and knowing when to do that is really important. This is one of my biggest tips. Silence is your friend. Sometimes in a meeting, when folks are contributing, and you can tell that the same folks keep talking and there are some who haven't, a very effective thing to say is, we're going to pause and wait to hear from those folks who haven't yet contributed. And then you wait. And you wait longer than you might think you need to. And I promise, you can find me anywhere on the internet. I want you to tell me if this doesn't happen. Someone will speak up. It takes more time than you think it does. Also, silence is not bad. Silence allows things to grow and cultivate. Silence is your friend. And the last thing is to experiment. I've only mentioned a small number of things that you can do. The world is your oyster. Be as creative as you can be as a moderator, and be willing to make mistakes. That's how we learn. Now, after the meeting, there are some things that you can do to really solidify the impact that you've had as an effective moderator. Follow up and talk about the highlights of the meeting, what was discussed, and publish those action items. The other thing is to publish all of the notes or data that was collected. Now, this might take some time on your part, but it will be worth it. Folks, do go back and look to see what everyone else had to say. Next, you want to reflect. What worked? What didn't? As a moderator, you can constantly be improving. There is no final destination. You just keep working at it and evaluating your performance as a moderator every single time you lead a meeting. Then you start planning your next meeting. They never end, right? There are so many. Okay, some folks say, how can I employ these things or utilize these tips if I'm not the moderator? So when you're invited to a meeting, ask for the agenda. Ask what the objective of the meeting is. This can help force the moderator to do some of that, like planning work. There are lots of things you can do during the meeting to support inclusivity. If you notice that some folks haven't spoken, you can use your turn to ask someone what they think. And you can help interrupt the interrupters and return the moment to the original speaker. If the discussion has gotten off track, you can jump in with a question to help realign to the meeting objective. And lastly, you could volunteer to moderate. I hope you're getting a sense of the importance of the moderator's commitment to the meeting and the meeting objective. When everyone is able to contribute, to be heard, and feel like they're included, you reap the full benefits from the diversity on your team. And I've witnessed the impact of inclusive meetings. It is transformative. When you have an environment where everyone has the chance to contribute, all voices have an equal weight, and it's safe to share your thoughts and opinions, you have a team with a deep sense of belonging, and that is the definition of inclusivity. Thank you very much for your time today.